of how we ended up with Rapture Day, May 21. But I'm going to start a little bit theatrical, because to understand this idea of doomsday, we have to go all the way back to the first doomsday story. And I don't know if you immediately get which doomsday story I'm talking about. This is the words of God. I will send rain on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. I will blot out from the face of the land every living thing that I have made. Then the flood came upon the earth for 40 days. The water prevailed more and more upon the earth, so that all the high mountains everywhere under the heavens were covered. All flesh that moved on the earth perished, birds and cattle and beasts and every swarming thing that swarms upon the earth, and all mankind, of all that was on the dry land, all in whose nostrils was the breath of the Spirit of life, died. Thus he blotted out every living thing that was upon the face of the land, from man to animals, to creeping things, and to the birds of the sky, and they were blotted out from the earth. God likes to repeat himself. And it gets worse on the next slide. Only Noah was left, together with those that were with him in the ark. Now, before I move on, I just have to point out some little problematic things. All mankind died, of course. That's a problem. And that's another problem. There's Eddie Izzard has a joke where he says ducks must be evil because they float. And the purpose of the flood was to kill all the evil things, because everything was evil. So dolphins must be evil, because they weren't killed by the flood. So watch out for those evil dolphins. And apparently, God was very upset. He had regret after this, like a wife beater afterwards. Oh, I'm so sorry. And I read again, and this is God. And I will establish my covenant with you. Never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood, nor shall there any more be a flood to destroy the earth. This is the token of the covenant which I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you, for perpetual generations, like forever. I do set my rainbow in the cloud. Isn't that nice? And it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth, that when I bring a cloud over the earth, the rainbow shall be seen in the cloud, and I will remember my covenant. God needs reminders. The rainbow is God's sticky note, I guess. Don't kill men. Which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh. And then the waters shall no more become a flood to destroy all flesh. And the rainbow shall be in the cloud. And I will look upon it, that I may remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is upon the earth. And Noah's going, yes, we get it. God damn it. And God said unto Noah, this is the token of the covenant which I have established between me and all flesh that is upon the earth. I'll never drown you people again. Okay, so where does this idea of the fiery, burn everybody, this new idea of doomsday come from? Well, it starts early on, this sort of visionary, metaphorical, maybe, perhaps, thinking. And it comes very back, like Prophet Nahum, for example. Listen to this, discussion of how great God is. He'll rebuke the sea and make it dry. He'll dry up all the rivers too. Bashan and Carmel wither. The blossoms of Lebanon wither. Mountains will quake because of him, and the hills will dissolve. The earth will be upheaved by his presence, the world and all the inhabitants in it. Who can stand before his indignation? Who can endure the burning of his anger? His wrath is poured out like fire, and the rocks are broken up by him. The Lord is good. I'm going to talk a little bit about how Isaiah got this more literal interpretation of this kind of thinking in a moment. But here's Isaiah. Lift up your eyes to the heavens and look at the earth beneath, for the heavens will vanish like smoke. The earth will wear away like an old garment, and they who dwell in it will die like gnats. But my salvation will be forever, and my deliverance will never be ended. Then we get Malachi. Behold, the day will come. Today, I guess. When it will burn like a furnace, and all the proud and all that work wickedness shall be stubble. And the day that comes shall burn them up, says Jehovah of hosts, until it shall leave them neither root nor branch. But unto you that fear my name shall the Son of Righteousness arise with healing in its wings, and you shall go forth and gambol as calves in the stall. And you shall tread down the wicked, for they shall be ashes under the soles of your feet in the day that I choose, says Jehovah of hosts. Now, you shall tread down the wicked, for they shall be ashes under the soles of your feet. It sounds very familiar, right? Oh, right. So what is with this skull-crushing fantasies? Well, there's a lot of passages in the Bible that show, and you can look at the whole book of Joshua, for example, where the Jews just come in, God has promised them this land, they come in and they just freaking murder everybody. I mean, they kill women, children, it's genocide, essentially. And they had this doctrine, this idea that they were the chosen ones of God and the chosen ones of the world, and they were essentially the master race, and everyone should eventually bow down to them, and that was their expectation. And if you doubt me, I'll read Zechariah. And this shall be the plague whereby Jehovah will smite all the peoples that have warred against Jerusalem. Their flesh shall rot away while they stand upon their feet, and their eyes shall rot away in their sockets, and their tongue shall rot away in their mouth. A lot of hyper-specificity here. But I mean, if you rot, you rot. But anyway. And the same plague shall befall the horse, the mule, and the camel, the ass, and all the beasts that shall be in their camps. And it shall come to pass that anyone that is left of all the nations that came against Jerusalem shall go up from year to year to worship the King, Jehovah of hosts, and to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. And it shall be that whoever of all the families of the earth does not go up to Jerusalem to worship the King, Jehovah of hosts, upon them there shall be no rain. And if the family of Egypt go not up and come not, neither shall rain be not upon them. Again, God likes to repeat himself. But there'll be that plague, too, whereby Jehovah will smite the nations that go not up to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. This shall be the punishment of all the nations that go not up to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. Hello. They really had this idea that they were going to rule all nations, that all nations were going to bow to Israel, and they were going to be the master race in charge of everybody. Unfortunately, now, mind you, this is what they think. They think the God of the universe has chosen them to rule the world. And here, let me see if I can. They're like here. And mind you, this little laser dot is way huger than their actual kingdom. And then the Persians come along, and you see the yellow? The Persians conquer this massive empire. And then, of course, the Persians come and completely stomp Israel, and they go into captivity. Now, you might wonder where the Jews got a lot of their ideas that infected Christianity as well, about these ideas of doomsday. Well, they come from Zoroastrianism, and Darrell Ray actually mentioned this religion. You can Google it and learn about it. It's really weird in many respects. But it was the national religion of the Persian Empire. So if I hop back there, all that yellow, that was Zoroastrian territory. And Zoroastrianism had its own doomsday teaching. And Zoroastrianism had this idea of a great cosmic war of good versus evil, light versus dark. Our modern idea of Satan as the enemy of God, and they're at war against each other, this is a Zoroastrian idea. It comes from Zoroastrianism. The idea that there's a hell that people burn in, the idea that good people will wait in heaven for a future resurrection, this is Zoroastrian belief. The idea that a river of fire will be sent by God that will flow over the universe, burning everything up, even hell itself, that comes from Zoroastrianism. And the idea that God would then build a new, better world in its place, Zoroastrianism. And the idea that all good people will be resurrected. God will rebuild their bodies and resurrect them and make their bodies immortal, and they'll live in that new world happily ever after, Zoroastrian belief. And of course, the Jews, once they were in captivity, learned all these great things. Shit, their God's better than ours. No, our God's better than theirs, so therefore our God is going to do that for us. Good luck burning in hell, you Persian scum. But that's not what happened. The Jews were expecting, of course, God would come in and punish Persia, and of course all peoples would worship and bow down at Jerusalem. But no, unfortunately, the one nation that actually did succeed in preventing Persia from taking it over wasn't Israel, who had the God of the universe protecting it, but the Greeks. So the Greeks actually repelled Persia, and this is actually the beginning of the sort of decline of the Persian Empire. And I'm introducing the Greeks here for a particular reason, because that's where science comes from, incidentally. So the culture that invented science is the culture that actually had God's protection against the Persians. But you can use that argument against your Christian and really annoy him. In this book, The Christian Delusion, I have 2 chapters. The last chapter in which I talk about Christian attitudes towards science and ancient science how it really was. And the thing I'm going to talk about in the moment, I discuss it in this book if you're curious about looking at the sources and where it comes from. We get to Aristotle. Now, Aristotle gives us the first in history, the first scientific argument for doomsday, and it actually kind of makes a little bit of sense. Now, Aristotle observed that the arts and sciences had not reached the end of their progress. He says there's so much more to learn, there's so much more perfect they could be. He also reasoned that nothing can be created or destroyed, since only nothing can come from nothing. We've recently discovered that that's probably not the case. But anyway, Aristotle's just getting started. He's like Freud to psychology. He's wrong about a lot of stuff, but he started it. But he said, if nothing can come from nothing, nothing can be created or destroyed. Therefore, the universe must always have existed. And he had some other arguments, scientific arguments for that conclusion as well. But if the universe has always existed, the arts and sciences would have reached total perfection by now. We'd be exploring the galaxy or whatever. Therefore, the world must suffer periodic cataclysms that throw men back into the Stone Age, so they have to rediscover everything all over again. And this is Aristotle's argument. So there have to be these cataclysms. There must be, scientifically, or else we would be at year infinity in technological development today. But we're not. And he was kind of right. Because the Dark Ages are actually an example of that kind of cataclysm, where a lot of the advances, technological and scientific, that were made in the ancient world were lost and had to be rediscovered. So Aristotle was, not completely off his rocker. It just wasn't a cataclysm. It was just Christians. But anyway. Now, Aristotle and Zoroastrianism were mixing at this time, philosophy and Zoroastrianism, Greek ideas. And we got this in pagan religion, a doomsday idea. In the Greco-Roman pagan religions had their own doomsday notion. And in writers like Virgil and Lucretius, we hear about a day when the world will burn up. But it might be like 10,000 years from now or 25,000 years. There was a scientist who calculated that the Earth actually wobbles like a top when you spin a top. But not only is it spinning, but it's also like making a slow rotating motion. I don't know if you can see my hand. If you've ever seen a top do that, that's called precession. Well, the Earth precesses as well. And it actually carves a circle out where it shifts all the signs in the zodiac, and they do a complete rotation every 25,000 years, he calculated. He got it down much more precisely than that. And so some people thought, that must be when the world will burn up, every 25,000 years. But the point to make here is they didn't say it's going to happen any day now. They said, it's a long way away, but it'll happen. And then it'll cool back down and start all over again. And philosophers like Stoics and Epicureans, they only debated whether the universe would run exactly the same each time. So like if Socrates at 9:01 a.m. tripped over a frog or something, and it would keep repeating every time. You would have a Socrates, you'd trip over the same frog exactly the same way. The Epicureans said, no, it'll be different. He'll trip over something else instead. Anyway, that's how that comes out. Now we get to the Christian doomsday. And this is from the New Testament. And you'll see it has a lot of these ideas of these pagan notions and these Zoroastrian notions, only that it's going to happen any day now, like it's imminent. Know this first, that in the last days mockers shall come with their mockery, saying, where is the promise of his coming? For everything continues as it had from the beginning of creation. But they willfully forget that there were heavens from of old, and an earth compacted out of water, and amidst water by the word of God. And by that same means the world that then was, being overflowed with water, also perished. But the heavens that now are, and the earth, by the same word, have been stored up for fire, being reserved against the day of judgment and destruction of ungodly men. So, the Bible says the world was destroyed before, so obviously it's going to happen again. If you get the fallacy there, I'll let you ruminate on it. And he continues, but forget not this one thing, dears, that one day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day. So the Lord is not slack concerning his promise, as some count slackness, but is long-suffering toward you. He's putting up with you. Not wishing that any should perish. He doesn't really want that to happen, but he's going to do it anyway. But that all should come to repentance. But the day of the Lord will come as a thief, when the heavens shall pass away with a great noise, and the elements will be dissolved with fervent heat, and the earth and the works therein shall be burned up. Seeing that these things are all to be dissolved like this, what manner of persons ought you be? So look for and earnestly desire the coming of the day of God. So the heavens being on fire shall be dissolved, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat. Because according to his promise, we look for a new heavens and a new earth, wherein shall dwell righteousness. Well, of course, subtext here. Now, Jesus, of course, said, this generation shall not pass away until all these things be accomplished. And he had just himself summarized his own apocalyptic predictions, which, of course, didn't happen. But in the Christian Delusion, John Loftus has a chapter titled, Jesus was a failed apocalyptic prophet. So if you want the decisive demonstration of that, that's in that book. But it's an interesting thing to point out is they were expecting the world to be burned up any moment now. And they were preaching things like I just read to you, and it was supposed to happen. So by the time we get to 64 AD, it's been like 30 years since supposedly that prediction was made, and it's not coming to pass. And we hear about Christians, Rome, the city of Rome burns down. There were claims that Nero did it to build a new palace or something like that. But what Nero and the government said is that the Christians are to blame, and they actually hauled in Christians and interrogated them and tortured them, waterboarding, because that works. And many of the Christians confessed. They said they did it. Now, a lot of people think that, well, this is just, a kangaroo court and so forth, but there's some reason to think that it might have actually been true, because the Christians are expecting the world to be burned at any moment now. It's not happening. We just saw earlier demonstrations of they'll resort to violence to try and make things happen if it's not going to plan. So it's actually conceivable that Christians actually did try to set the world on fire and, of course, got caught. Or it's possible that they were preaching this stuff, and then, of course, the pagans are saying, well, they're preaching about the world's going to burn up any moment now. Look, the world's burning up, so obviously the Christians did it. Either way, you can see the plausible course of action from what happened. So it's something to think about, but, we don't have enough evidence either way. But why Christianity? I mean, I've just read stuff from the Jewish Holy Day. Wasn't the Jewish apocalypse already good enough? Why did we need Christianity? Well, the fact of the matter is, in the 1st century AD, when Christianity started, it was actually awash with a sudden Messiah fever. There's Messiah fever everywhere. Everybody's claiming to be the Messiah. And we have books like the Parables of Enoch. We have the Dead Sea Scrolls that are filled with these expectations. It's going to happen any moment now. The Christ is on his way. John the Baptist and Simon Magus were both claimed to be the Messiah or the harbinger of the Messiah. Josephus, a historian of this period, writes about a variety of these messianic pretenders. And the Jewish war itself, we have several sources corroborating this. The Jews actually started the Jewish war in an attempt to bring upon the apocalypse. It was based on this prophecy that the Messiah would come during a certain particular war, and so they actually warred against Rome to do this. So the war was actually caused by these messianic apocalyptic beliefs. Now, with all these people claiming to be the one, is it really any surprise that one of them would get a successful cult going? It shouldn't be. But let me talk about Josephus. Josephus mentions several of these guys. I'm going to talk about 3 of them because they're the most significant. And the first, I want to give you some backstory. You know the book of Joshua. You know Joshua's, Moses' right-hand man. Joshua actually is Jesus. Those names are identical. Bibles translate them differently, but they're actually the exact same name. So whenever you read Joshua, read Jesus. Every time it says Joshua, it actually says, the text actually says Jesus. So it's important to know that because these are the things that we learn about these messianic pretenders in the time of Josephus. One of them was called the Samaritan. Now, the Samaritan actually tried to gather a bunch of people on Mount Gerizim in Samaria, promising to uncover the secret things of God. And the thing is, and he said before, and what happens is the first Jesus, Joshua, the first Jesus, he actually did the same thing. He gathered everybody to worship at Mount Gerizim before crossing the Jordan to basically destroy the Canaanites and conquer the nation of Israel. So this is actually a very messianic thing to do. It is to recreate what the first Jesus did, which happened right before conquest and reconquering the Holy Land. And so that's a politically significant statement. Now, another one was Theudas. He actually went around saying that he was going to part the Jordan, and that was how he gathered followers. And it's important to note that the first Jesus, Joshua, the first Jesus also did this. He parted the Jordan magically before crossing, again, to create the nation of Israel. So this is a apocalyptic messianic claim. And then we have the Egyptian. The Egyptian preached from the Mount of Olives, which we know the Messiah was expected to do from Old Testament prophecy. And he claimed he would fell the walls of Jerusalem just like the walls of Jericho had been. Now, once again, this is what the first Jesus did in his first battle after crossing the Jordan, was drop the walls of Jericho. So again, this is a messianic claim. He's basically saying, I'm the new Jesus. Every one of these guys is saying that. I'm the new Jesus. I'm trying to recreate what the first Jesus did. I'm the next Jesus, the last Jesus. We're going to bring this stuff on. Now note, our Jesus, the New Testament Jesus, also parts the Jordan in a sense. He's baptized in it. Our Jesus also visited Mount Gerizim, and that's in John, the Gospel of John. Jesus also preached on the Mount of Olives, just as the Messiah was expected to, according to Zechariah 14. So we have a lot of parallels here. There's a lot of connections between these particular guys. Now, several of these guys did foolish things and got themselves killed by the Romans, just like our Jesus did. Yet the expectation was, and you hear this often, was that the Messiah should be a victorious super warrior, a king of kings, completely invincible. So there are two ways to look at this. Did they foolishly think God had their back, like they were going to be invincible? Or did they actually expect to get killed? Now, why would they expect to get killed? Well, we actually have a prophecy in Daniel. It is in the Old Testament. This is the scriptures of God, which actually says, point blank, the Christ shall be killed, even though there is no judgment upon him. Then the city and the sanctuary will be torn down by the ruler who will come. They will be knocked down in a cataclysm until the end, when after war wreaks havoc, there will be a systematic extermination. And it goes on to describe, basically, they're going to have the general resurrection and the new paradise will result. So we already have this clear statement that the Messiah was expected to be killed, even though he's innocent, and that this would usher in the apocalypse, the end of the world. We have other references to this. In Psalms 89:38, the Messiah, God's servant, it actually has the word Messiah there, says he'll be cast off by God and allowed to die by the hands of his enemies. So their own scriptures are predicting this thing's going to happen. Now we also have Isaiah 53, where it point blank says God's servant will be killed even though innocent. Sound familiar? And his death will atone for all the sins of Israel. And there's a lot of other passages in there talking about him bringing the gospel. If you look at Isaiah 53, it's basically a roadmap for writing the gospels. It's basically the gospel story in miniature already. Now, a lot of Christians will say, well, no, the Christians later interpreted Isaiah 53. The Jews weren't doing this. The Jews didn't see that as messianic, but that's actually not true. The Talmud says Isaiah 53 is about the Messiah and records a rabbinical debate over whether he had indeed already died. We have a first century Targum, which is kind of like a commentary and paraphrase of the Old Testament, that actually has the word Messiah in Isaiah 53. So it actually clearly thought it was Messiah. And we have a Dead Sea Pesher, which is another kind of like a commentary. It explicitly identifies the servant of Isaiah 53 with the Messiah of Daniel 9, the Messiah who's going to die just before ushering in the apocalypse. So there's this whole nexus of documents that clearly several Jews, many Jews at this time, were looking at and believing and understanding that this new Christ, he's going to come, he's going to get killed, his death is going to atone for the sins of Israel, and then the apocalypse is going to happen. So when you look back at those guys doing those foolish things, getting themselves killed, it might not look anymore like they're expecting God will have their back. It might look like they're actually trying to get themselves killed to usher in the apocalypse. Now remember, Christ just means Messiah. And as we just saw earlier, many people in the same generation are claiming to be the new Jesus, the Joshua, the new Jesus and Messiah. In other words, lots of people in this very period, in this early first century, are claiming to be the new Jesus Christ. So we've got Jesus Christ everywhere. Now, why this Isaiah 53 passage and connecting it to Daniel 9? Why is that important? Note this thing that the death of the Messiah will atone for the sins of Israel. Now, note, throughout the Old Testament, it is their sins, the sins of the Jews, for which God keeps holding back his promise. Whenever he says, I'm going to kill all your enemies and make you rulers of the world, and the prophets whine and go, why haven't you done this yet? Why haven't you done this yet? He always says, well, because you're sinners, and when you stop sinning, then I'll do it. So a Jesus Christ who dies to atone for all those sins is exactly what is needed to clear the way for doomsday. Because once you cancel the sins, then God no longer has that excuse, and now the timetable can start. So the whole gospel looks like a homemade, designed, apocalyptic cult based on the Old Testament scriptures, and there were lots of people trying to start these exact same religions like Christianity based on the same underlying principles. But why is everybody claiming to be Jesus Christ and trying to get himself killed at this exact time in history? Why the early first century? What's going on there? Well, let's look at Daniel 9 again, another section of it, where it says, 70 weeks are decreed upon thy people and upon thy holy city to finish transgression and to make an end of sins, make a note of that, and to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, remember what Peter was saying, and to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. From the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem to the Christ shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. And after that 62 weeks shall the Christ be killed. Then the evil one will make a covenant with many for 1 week. And in the midst of that week he shall cause the sacrifice to end until the full end, when wrath will be poured out upon the desolate. So here we have a sort of apocalyptic timetable with actual numbers in it. And the weeks are supposed to be understood as days of years. So it's like 7 years. Each week is 7 years. And we have in the Dead Sea Scrolls in the century before the time of Jesus, they show attempts to work out, this is before Christianity, attempts to work out what date these numbers point to, using week to mean 7 years and trying out different calendars. And by one method, which we have in a later Christian source, it works out to exactly 30 AD. So is it any surprise that's, guess what? That's exactly when Jesus is supposed to have been killed. So all that suicidal Jesus Christ mania was caused by a doomsday timetable laid out in the Jewish book of the prophet Daniel. Now, what was supposed to happen? What did Daniel say? What is his prediction for the course of events? According to Daniel's timetable, the Messiah was to appear around 30 AD, or somewhere around there, depending on your calculations, then be killed despite his innocence. Then Jerusalem would be destroyed by an evil prince. That's what Daniel says. Then in just a few years after that, God's wrath will be poured out, and the resurrection would begin, and everybody would live happily ever after, and then it's all righteous gambling on the ashen skulls of our enemies. In other words, everyone was claiming to be Jesus Christ, trying to get themselves killed to start a war that would usher in God's apocalypse so we can all stop waiting to live happily ever after already. Now, does this political strategy sound eerily familiar to anyone? And for those of you with iPhones and iPads, I'm telling you now, Google Armageddon Lobby, and you'll find some disturbing things if you're not already hip to this, as I'm sure many of you are. It's going on now. The same interference with public policy is engaging to sort of bring on the apocalypse, doing the same kind of thing. But it didn't happen. There was no gambling on the ashen skulls of their enemies. Oops. And this, of course, has been happening again and again and again throughout history. There's hundreds of these. Christianity is certain it's going to happen now, it doesn't happen. Certain it's going to happen now, it doesn't happen. For 2,000 years. And there's two good books on this, A History of the End of the World and The Continuum History of Apocalypticism. Those books sort of give you all the background and all the different cases. But the thing is, the punchline isn't even what I've summed up to this point. There's André Lecoq wrote this book, a commentary on the book of Daniel, and he's not the only one. He didn't come up with this. This is an idea that was well understood throughout the scholarly community, but he gives the best articulation of it. Daniel was originally a failed prophecy, because Daniel, the book of Daniel, was forged around the year 165 BC and passed off as a prophetic book from around 500 BC, and the evidence for this is pretty conclusive. Its original timetable was intended to predict, quote-unquote, the end of the world in 164 BC, during the Hasmonean resistance to Greek occupation, rather than, as in 30 AD, the Roman occupation. But it didn't happen. So everyone tried reinterpreting the data in the timetable, and that's what we see in the Dead Sea Scrolls. They're trying to figure out, well, Daniel couldn't be wrong. And one such result pegged the 30s AD as the correct time. The latest such result pegged today as the correct time. Has Jesus shown up yet, by the way? Tick-tock, tick-tock. But that's not even the funny bit. No. Daniel was trying to fix another failed prophecy. This is Daniel 1, Daniel 9, the first verses of it. I, Daniel, understood by the scriptures the number of the years, according to the word of Jehovah that came to Jeremiah, the prophet, for bringing to pass the doomsday of Jerusalem as being 70 years. And I set my face unto the Lord God to seek by prayer and supplications with fasting and sackcloth and ashes in order to ask him what the fuck. This is Jeremiah's doomsday prophecy, so we're going back. Therefore saith Jehovah of hosts, as punishment for your sins, you and other nations shall serve the king of Babylon 70 years. Notably, this is when the Babylonians had conquered the Jews, but almost immediately after that, the Persians came and conquered Babylon and the Jews again. So even the serving of Babylon is false, because the Babylonians were conquered by the Persians. So this prophecy is way off base, even from the out of the gate. But nations shall serve the king of Babylon 70 years. And when 70 years are done, then I will punish the king of Babylon and his whole nation for their crimes. I will make it desolate forever. And likewise all the kingdoms of the whole world which are upon the face of the earth. Jehovah will roar from on high against all the inhabitants of the earth. And Jehovah will judge all flesh, and the wicked will be put to the sword. And the slain of Jehovah shall be on that day from one end of the earth even unto the other end of the earth. They shall not be lamented, neither gathered nor buried. They shall be as dung upon the face of the ground. That's an example of, I should have put that Nazi flag in here again. But it didn't happen. And so Daniel this prophecy is very clear. I mean, that's the problem with very clear prophecies, is they're guaranteed to fail. it didn't come to pass. So Daniel is like in anguish over this and reinterprets it, and that's where we get the Danielic prophecy, where God says, oh no, I meant 70 weeks of years, not 70 years. There's miscommunication, textual error or something, I don't know. But that prophecy didn't work out, so people tried to recalculate the math and got Christianity, essentially. So this is to recap, basically. Around 600 BC, Jeremiah witnesses his master race get its ass kicked by the Babylonians and Persians and asks God, what the fuck? And God says it will last only 70 years. Then God will reward his master race by holocausting the rest of the world. When that doomsday didn't occur and the Jews were getting their asses kicked yet again by the Greeks, someone faked a prophecy from Daniel around 165 BC in which God says, oh, I meant 70 weeks of years. When that doomsday didn't occur, everyone tried using different calendars and calculations to get Daniel not to be wrong, and many came up with the date in the 1st century AD, conveniently right when the Jews got sold out to the Romans this time. So the Jews, believing they are the master race who are promised by their God they'd rule the whole world and gamble on the ashen skulls of their enemies, keep getting stomped on and ruled by their enemies again and again and again. At last, Daniel could be stretched to mean sometime in the 1st century AD, the Christ would be executed, and a war would soon follow in which the Jews would get their asses kicked for just the last time, and then the end would finally come in just a few years after that. So everyone tried being that Christ, tried getting killed, but no war followed. And when a war finally did follow, there was no gambling on the skulls of their enemies. In the midst of all this, one of those Christs managed to inspire a following that survived his death, and their movement became what we call Christianity. They kept their apocalyptic claims alive by various devices. Sure, it would come any minute now, because after all, their Christ had been killed exactly as Daniel predicted, and Daniel can't be wrong, even though he didn't say any of those things because the book is forgery. Then a lucky turn came. Paul said God had told me in a dream. God had told him, you don't even have to be Jews. You can be adopted into the master race, which kind of eliminates the whole master race idea. And it's more about the moral community we create rather than the actual doomsday thing anyway, although that's sure to come any minute now. It's still sure to come any minute now. After 2,000 years. Has Jesus shown up yet? No. Tick-tock, tick-tock. So a failed prophecy from 600 BC causes a fake prophecy to be forged in 165 BC that reinterprets the earlier failed prophecy, but that also fails. So people try recalculating from that fake prophecy, which failed also, and get dates in the 1st century, which leads to a fad of Jesus Christs everywhere trying to get killed, which causes Christianity. And they've been recalculating again and again, after failure, as doomsday keeps not turning up. For 2,000 years, and still going. This could well be the longest-running delusion in history, spanning over 2,500 years, despite being decisively refuted hundreds of times. I want to emphasize that. So do you think it will finally happen this time? I mean, Jesus Christ. So what's the cure? What do we do? Well, I have a solution for that. I've written manuals to help you. And since this is my only source of income now, please buy them. No, really, I really appreciate it a lot. I can't make a living at this, but I can at least justify my life to my wife, I'm bringing in some money. I bring in some, not a lot. Well, what are these books? Not The Impossible Faith, up on the upper left there. That book is, again, about the origins of Christianity, and you'll hear more about this, how Isaiah 53 predicts, basically everything in the gospel, and various other aspects of the ancient world. But each chapter in that can be used as a way to defeat an argument that you will hear often. One of them is, for example, the Christians would never make up a story about women being witnesses to the empty tomb because no one trusted the testimony of women back then, which is completely false. And if you want to see the proof that it's false, with all the citations and all the evidence and all the scholarship, I have a chapter for you in that. And there's 18 chapters in all, so it's a good little manual. When you run into these arguments, you can actually go in there. But also at the same time, I'm completely trashing this Christian apologist who's a complete idiot. And so it's a lot of fun as well. So you get entertained as well as informed. And then the Christian delusion on the lower left, I have 2 chapters in that, but there are many chapters in it, and it's really awesome. One of my favorites is by Hector Avalos, where he proves that the Nazi platform, the entire plan of the Nazis, actually is point by point by point Martin Luther's plan. Not Darwin's. You can't find any of those points in Darwin. So when you hear this idea that Darwinism caused the Nazi Holocaust, no, it was Protestantism. Sorry. And it's so brilliant. You can't argue against it. It's worth getting. But all the chapters in this are awesome. And they're actual case studies that you can use. You can use them to argue against Christians. It reminds me of the Back in Black bit on The Daily Show. I saw one of his comedy routines, and he says he carries a fossil around in his pocket, so whenever he runs into a creationist spewing his stuff, he pulls it out and he goes, "Fossil!" Well, that's what you can do with Christian delusion. There's lots of interesting chapters in there on that. But on the other side of things, on the other side of the screen, on sense and goodness without God, that's a different take. That's actually what you should believe. It's instead of attacking religion, it's a complete worldview for like what I think atheists should believe, or at least the start of it. Even if you want to fix it or improve it, this is the place to start and work it out. So I have a complete philosophy of life there, which is, I think, the correct way to go. And of course, there's no apocalyptic gods in it, needless to say. And the book underneath, Why I'm Not a Christian, that just came out recently. In that, I basically show in a really thin volume why the book on top makes a lot more sense of the world than Christianity does, and it does it in a really quick, short way. So I'm sure maybe at least one or two of these will be of interest to you. And also, you could, just to give you, a real shameless plug here, you could buy more and like give them to libraries and to Christian friends and stuff. Okay, I'll stop being shameless. So anyway. Okay. Oh, I'm astonished. Okay, that's excellent. Its sequel, by the way, is coming out in July, The End of Christianity, and it is a decisive killer punch, I think. But anyway, you can look for that. Okay, I'm done. So.